For disclosure, this review copy was provided by Nightdive Studios, and if you have not seen the 1982 film The Thing, as the title implies, I am going to spoil the ending, so this is your one and only warning. John Carpenter's The Thing, adapted from John Campbell's 1938 novella Who Goes There, is my favourite horror film of all time. And that says a lot because I'm not someone who likes to be definitive when it comes to deciding the best of all time. I view The Thing as an absolute masterclass in atmosphere, tension, paranoia, and just outright visceral horror. In fact, it's perhaps the film that had the most profound effect on me when it came to discovering and solidifying my tastes and sensibilities for the genre. I'll admit it's not a perfect film, but it is an efficient piece of storytelling that injects just the right amount of ambiguity and restraint to make for an endlessly engaging mystery and character drama, and its ending is chef's kiss perfection. When I first went full-time with this channel back in 2017 after I graduated, The Thing was the first video I knew I had to make, and I know I've yet to properly address the 2011 prequel, but with the release of Nightdive Studios' remaster of the 2002 video game, let's make winter 2024 just that little bit more special. When you think of John Carpenter's The Thing, I'm sure a tactical squad-based action shooter isn't exactly what you had in mind, and I'm sure purists are already shell-shocked at the idea, as was I, when you consider it on paper. However, in execution, it surprisingly suits the concept quite well. Originally developed by Computer Artworks, The Thing video game serves as a direct sequel that takes place almost immediately after the film, where we step into the shoes of the ruggedly generic Captain Blake.
I'm not doing anything until I get some goddamn answers.
You're out of your league here, Blake.
As Blake, you initially lead a B-team to investigate US Outpost 31, where the original film takes place, before travelling to the Norwegian outpost where the titular Thing was originally discovered, in search of the A-team, only to find that shit has obviously hit the frozen fan. From there, you basically shoot and incinerate your way through a surprisingly relentless onslaught of alien variations, as you slowly learn that a mysterious Umbrella-esque medical research company is trying to weaponize the genetics of the creature. Naturally, if you love the raw, bottled, character-centric intimacy of the original story, you're going to hate the Hollywoodization of the game that in several ways bastardizes the unique ambiguity of the film. There isn't anything worth narratively dissecting here, it's pretty much your boilerplate military bioweapon plot like Resident Evil, where the villain has a personal motive, but your objectives are still based around the general ethos and goal as McReady in the film, where you ultimately want to ensure that the creature or creatures do not make it to civilization. Now, to address the concerns of how a squad-based action shooter suits the stylistic approach to Carpenter's film requires more nuance. Yeah, it's easy to look back on it 22 years since its release and ask why it didn't take a more slow-paced survival horror approach, but in a 2013 retrospective by Edge, the game's original director William Latham saw the game as an extension to the framework behind their previous title Evolva, which involved organic alien creatures that could mutate, thus fitting the shape-shifting qualities of The Thing. According to Latham, Universal were surprisingly firm about the game maintaining Carpenter's original vision and tone, with Carpenter as an avid gamer himself even giving the game his blessing and having a cameo as one of the main characters. In another retrospective by Graham Mason for Eurogamer in 2014, the game's lead designer Andrew Curtis seemed to imply that the game was a sort of atmospheric transition from the film, similar to the shift from Alien to Aliens, by opening with a tense and ominous exploration of the film's two outposts and slowly building up the danger before suddenly unleashing it on unsuspecting soldiers out of nowhere. That's essentially a summary of how I felt playing it. The game gripped my attention with giddy nostalgia as it captures the film's cold, oppressive Arctic setting as you enter the dilapidated ruins of where chaos has long transpired, building a sense of dread that you and your team are unprepared for. The immensely improved visuals not only stop environments environments from looking repetitive, but they feel much more lived in, igniting similar evocative environmental storytelling qualities as the film, such as when the US group investigate the Norwegian outpost and discover the grotesque remains of a brutal event. The persistent presence of death is there from the moment your feet touch the snow, as being outside causes an exposure meter to drain that will kill you pretty quickly if you become distracted, particularly during constant ambushes that occur later in the game. There's always that inherent worry of a horror game being a product of its time, but the visual overhauls of the remaster, particularly in the lighting, really sell the immersion as you discover the original UFO, Blair's unused noose, and of course McReady's famously moody recording detailing his crew's fear, bewilderment, and paranoia over who's human and who's not. However, investigating further, you soon find the frozen remains of Childs, with McReady nowhere to be seen. It calls back to the original film's ending, where Childs and McReady have finished destroying the outpost and all remains of the creature and those who fell prey to it, and are now left alone to wait out the cold until they freeze to death, uncertain if either of them are the Thing. The game, of course, gives you a definitive answer to that famous open ending, which, yes, I for one would rather not have, but for the purposes of the game, it helps recap all the beats of the original film to set in place the utter mayhem that's yet to come. Now, for the record, I know some people watching are only here for the vibes and haven't actually seen the thing, so let me provide a quick bit of context. The basic plot of the film is that an alien crash lands in Antarctica and is later discovered frozen by a Norwegian research team who accidentally defrost it and soon learn that it has the ability to consume and assimilate its victims and their clothing. Yet most crucially, when the creature escapes and invades the US camp where the film takes place, they learn that every cell of the creature is a unique organism, meaning that if it separates either through blood or tissue, those individual components can act completely independent of each other. In other words, not only can it hide amongst us and other living beings, but it can have multiple versions of itself, thus creating persistent paranoia because you simply do not know who's infected and who isn't. Now, note that I use the word infected. In the film, it never explicitly explains how transformation takes place, but in the game, it specifically treats contact with the alien as an infection that gradually takes over, thus implying one might be infected and won't know until it decides to unleash itself. You can get as pedantic as you want on this, but it doesn't change the basic thesis that it can assimilate, it can duplicate, and all it wants to do is survive. And you can kill it with fire. Burn, motherfucker, burn. After a tense and gruesome opening, the combat consists of predominantly fighting headcrabs that can be shot dead easily, but make up for it in sheer numbers. The big boys, however, require fire to finish them off. You can weaken them with bullets, but ultimately a blowtorch, flamethrower, or incendiary grenade is the only way to get rid of them. They come in several variations, but all basically do the same thing, which is to bum rush you, puke on you, bitch slap you, and then when you call their bluff with a flamethrower, they run like hell. Oh, I see, you don't want to finish what you started, huh? Sure, it's not traditionally scary, but the combat is very faithful to the film because there's such an inherent chaos and spontaneity to it. You'll typically be caught off guard and clunkily switching between gun and flamethrower in the midst of a heated attack, and it's elevated further with how many of the fights happen in close quarters proximity. Gameplay-wise, it's not perfect, yet it captures the essence of what McCready went through when trying to destroy the creatures as they suddenly appear. You'll get a moment of downtime, then out of nowhere you'll be thrown right back into it. It left me genuinely flustered in a way that suits the mindset of what the characters in the film go through. While one might find the controls and systems to be janky and cumbersome as you switch weapons with your right hand and your grenades and inventory on your left, I actually think it indirectly works with the jarringness and claustrophobic chaos of the film. The problem, however, is I find myself overpowered in most cases, because you're basically packing a small armory of pistols, shotguns, submachine guns, grenades, a grenade launcher, and a rifle that's so satisfying when it comes to headshots, but strangely, despite being long distance, you still have to close a sizable gap for the shot to register, it seems, at least in my experience, unless I'm just bad at it. But again, there's a suitable franticness to it that only escalates in intensity as the game progresses, when bigger and deadlier variations become more common. I actually find myself comparing it to Resident Evil 4 to a certain degree, even though it came out 2 years later, where the first half is more tense and atmospheric as you begin understanding your surroundings, while the second half settles into a heavier action rhythm, but without fully sacrificing the frenzied nature of its horror. There are enemy human soldiers introduced in the second half when the evil bioweapon company comes into play that aren't exactly interesting to fight, but they help add a bit of variety, and they're not terribly common, I feel. Although undoubtedly a major design choice that the game is sold on that further helps reinforce its commitment to being faithful to the film is the trust system, which I'm just going to say, for full transparency, I don't entirely know how well it works or if it works too well, so I will keep stressing that your experience may vary to mine, which in itself probably speaks volumes for how effective it technically is, but let me do my best to explain my playthrough. So, you know the way having a squad of up to 4 additional men would take tension away from combat? Well, the idea of the trust system is that it's not supposed to. Basically, from the beginning, it sells you on the idea that your squad mates are very much alive and can think for themselves, so if you piss them off, or shoot them accidentally, or do anything perceived as suspicious or hostile, they can turn against you.
Sorry!
You're gonna get us killed.
Sorry,
As such, it's meant to feel less like you're simply escorting random AI bots you find throughout your journey, and more so making it a goal to maintain morale to get you through an increasingly dire situation. Your squad can grow scared, paranoid, and even suffer nervous breakdowns when it all becomes too much. They will literally throw up at the sight of mutilated corpses, they will panic when too many enemies are about, and hell, they can even off themselves if the situation feels utterly hopeless. In my playthrough, there was definitely an erratic energy to my squad, but I honestly rarely felt a need to keep an eye on them because either I was too busy with more immediate matters or I just didn't care strongly about their outcome. Vomiting was definitely a common feature, and there was one very specifically harrowing moment when I unlocked an optional door and found the aftermath of a slaughter, which caused my engineer to have a breakdown and refuse to go on. Most other times, squad members just seemed to go missing, and I couldn't tell if it was because I accidentally left them behind, or they ran away, or died somewhere else, and I just never noticed. I didn't playtest the system thoroughly because, let's be frank here, that's not how anyone is going to experience their own playthrough, but regardless, that sense of confusion, chaos, uncertainty, and ambiguity is, again, not only indicative of the film, but does make things feel more alive and dynamic as intended. Now, there are several ways to mitigate distrust and panic, like giving your squad mates adrenaline shots, guns, and ammo, but more importantly, you can also perform blood tests on either them or yourself. Of course, for plot reasons, you cannot become infected, but it will calm the nerves of your entire squad should your trust levels be really bad. Although, blood tests have a more crucial secondary usage, and that's to find out if anyone in your squad is infected, because some of them can suddenly transform into creatures at any time, especially when you've got your back turned in the midst of blaring combat. Should the blood reveal itself to be sentient, like in the film, you'll be forced to put on your teammate, which does make for some really fun "oh fuck what now" moments.
Maybe you will get us out of this.
Now, there is a major elephant in the room here we need to address, and that is, in the original release, there were accounts of the infected system being sneakily scripted, where you would perform a blood test that puts a squad mate in the clear, only for them to transform anyway. From the two articles I referenced, it seems even the original developers acknowledged the shortcomings of the design, where the technology simply wasn't there to pull off such a complex system. As lead designer Andrew Curtis reflected, they deliberately scripted certain infections due to technical and design limitations. Thus, it's a cool mechanic on paper, and there are still some exciting moments to be had, but ironically, you couldn't trust the system to be as fluid or spontaneous as it was meant to be. However, in a recent interview with Sci-Fi, Nightdive engineer Josh Dowell did confirm those scripted moments were removed, and squad mates will only transform should they make direct contact with the creature as originally intended, which is basically the experience I had, although I'll admit I only ever used blood tests 2 or 3 times, so it didn't exactly impact my playthrough, but again, your experience may vary on this. There are still several scripted moments when it comes to narrative purposes, like when you're first introduced to blood tests, and a later standoff between 2 engineers, but the real issue for me was that squad mates becoming infected doesn't meaningfully change the gameplay. Here's the thing, there are 3 types of squad mate: soldier, medic, and engineer, but the engineer is the only one that actually matters because they are required to repair certain electronics to progress certain levels. Should they die and they haven't fulfilled their purpose, it's simply a game over, whereas soldiers and medics only exist to provide support in combat, but rarely did I feel I needed them anyway, thus I did not care if they transformed. Maybe if I had a more limited arsenal and didn't have an abundance of medkits, they would have shown their worth, and the one time I had a full squad, we obliterated everything, which felt great, but ultimately you can pretty much do everything yourself, including arbitrarily repair certain electronics usually reserved for engineers? If you were to remake the game and have it be that losing the engineer would simply lock you out of certain areas and rewards, or force you to take a longer, more dangerous route to the objective, I can see its potential, but what's here still feels restrictive and conceptual due to limitations from the time. There are optional rooms you can be locked out of, like one containing a grenade launcher, but they still feel negligible. Don't get me wrong, the systems don't necessarily feel like a broken promise like you see in many AAA games today, but it certainly leaves me longing to see it reach its full potential if the tragically abandoned sequel was ever to see the light of day. Overall, the Thing video game is remastered with love and fittingly recaptures the film's tone. Yes, it does stray into generic sci-fi tropes with its story, but ultimately it's a matter of giving itself a fair reason to move along the action, which is greatly fulfilled with the quality of its visuals and combat. The Thing Remastered is a 6-hour journey through a cold, brooding, desolate landscape where you find yourself hunkering down in one confined bunker to the next, with unrelenting creatures that throw themselves at you as you feud with the same desperate purpose to survive.